want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
We are the Mad Men of Masculinity.
Your home for healthy masculinity. We're just real men having real conversations for you.
Good day, Mad Men Mafia.
Yo, yo, yo. I am Kirk M. Samuels.
And I still am Jason B. Kendrick.
And we are the Mad Men of Masculinity, baby.
That's right. We're just real men having real conversations for you.
That's right. Having some real talk, man. It's little afternoon conversation here. You know, just a couple folks as we record this thing. Just a couple fellas hanging around, just talking about stuff, guy stuff. 4 guys, about guys, 2 guys, on behalf of guys, all those kind of good things, man. That's just what we do.
Yes, sir. And if you're attempting to watch us on Facebook, it looks like Facebook has banned us because of the topic. So you'll have to come and watch us on YouTube, and I will link up later.
See, what's up with that? I mean, and that actually kind of goes into kind of the root of the issue. Like, we don't get to talk about stuff, man. You know, we get censored and we get banned and shadow banned and all that kind of stuff. And what I wanted to ask, man, I wanted to, just, and then, of course, with social media and the algorithms is all the, the trigger words, and the algorithm just blocks certain words that you can't even say and all that kind of stuff. I didn't even know that it was blocking us because, I was thinking, man, I've been thinking lately, when we look around society and when we look around a lot of things that are going on, I just wanted to pose a question, and that is, are men too violent these days?
Yeah, I know. The question's been going around. I had a question from one of our mutual friends who's a dating coach for men, and she was asking about, do men need to learn about violence, or, do boys need to learn about how to take care of themselves, or this and that? And I basically gave her my standard answer is that a man who doesn't know how to take care of himself, a man who doesn't have any experience with violence or self-protection, is usually the one that causes the issues. Most men, we know one of the greatest guys in the world who's an 8th degree, 9th degree black belt, and he's probably the most zen and calm and peaceful man you'll ever know, but he knows how to defend himself. And so there's a dichotomy, which, I mean, for most things as human beings, it's a dichotomy. We want safety, but we also want unsurety. We want to make sure we're, the roof's not going to fall in our heads. We also want to have something, some unsurety. That's why we go to amusement parks and go camping and do all these things that for a little sense of danger, a little adrenaline. But for most men, especially in our world, if you don't know how to defend yourself, if you don't know how to handle violence, then you tend to be the one who commits it. And you see a lot of these guys who raised in single mother households, who didn't have a father at home, who never learned how to deal with, because they didn't learn how to deal with men violence, the violent world we live in, and they don't have any sort of experience with that. And so these are the guys that tend to cause the most issues. And I'm sure if we find out actually who did this last shooting, if we find out whoever this person was, we're going to find someone who was probably weak of character, weak of foundation, probably didn't have a strong masculine presence in the home.
I think it's kind of a catch-22 because on one hand, we monetize violence amongst men in our culture for entertainment. I mean, going all the way back to the gladiators and all that kind of stuff. Today, man, how much money is made off of, we just had a big, big boxing match, here in the last day or two that, and you talk about all the MMA stuff. And when I think about, as we record this, it's a Sunday in the fall, which in America means men run around and smash into each other and basically just pummel each other for 3 or 4 hours and see, who can get the ball across the line. And so when you look at sports, we monetize male violence for profit and for entertainment. But at the same time, it is we got to be honest and say that, the fringe folks, and I'll say, the fringe ones that, that when you think about, for example, when you hear on the news there was some kind of mass casualty event. I'm trying to use softer words, because I don't want to trigger no more algorithms. But when when you hear about some mass casualty these days, especially in America, it's pretty much a lone male, right? And so a lot of people can go deeper on that topic, but I'll just leave it at that. But it's pretty much a lone male. And so on one hand, we fear male violence, but on the other hand, we profit off of male violence for our entertainment as part of our culture. And it's kind of a catch-22, man. And sometimes if you sit back and think about it, man, it's like, how do we find the middle ground? I don't think it's bad for a man to have the ability to be violent. I think it's bad when a man uses his ability to be violent for the sake of violence.
Yeah. Well, and that's, kind of my point is that there is violence. We do live in a violent world. I mean, like you said, we use violence for entertainment. I mean, and this stems all the way back to Roman times, and probably even before that, the gladiators, and, give them games and give them bread and wine, and, we'll be docile and controllable. And that same pattern is going on nowadays. We have so much entertainment, and a lot of it is violence. I mean, I get to points now, even with movies. Like, I'm such a movie file, and I love movies that some of them I don't even want to watch because, I mean, they're predictable. It's just violence. I mean, it's the same story rehashed over and over again. But there is that dichotomy of, especially for men, every man has a line that if you cross it, you're going to get blasted in the face or worse.
Mm-hmm.
And it's most of those guys that don't have any foundation, don't have any training, don't have a male role model in the house that tend to have a shorter line, a shorter fuse. I mean, we just mentioned, Natsky, and, he's probably one of the easiest going, most zen-like people in the world. And he spent his life training others how to defend themselves. And so there's that dichotomy of experience in a violent world. And I think that comes down to the basics of we as men, and we talked about this last episode, we probably talked about this for years now, men need to be in young men's lives and young boys' lives and train them how to be successful out in the world. And a lot of that means having those tough lessons, learning how to fail forward, learning how to handle yourself, learning how to protect yourself, and having some experience in that way. And what we tend to see is a lot of these boys that tend to be these mass shooters or tend to be the ones that are out there causing issues. They didn't have that experience. They didn't have that training. They don't have the tools to successfully navigate the world. And so they're just reacting and acting out. And so we as human beings, especially as men, we have to accept and acknowledge the fact that for the time being, I mean, maybe in the future it'll change. Maybe we'll finally get our poop in a group and create a utopia and learn how to handle our issues without violence. But until that day, we need to be prepared for the instance that maybe there's going to be some violence in our future, and we need to be prepared for that.
I wonder if what we're seeing is really the first wave of a generation or generations, the first wave of generations that were raised without a father or a man being a primary figure in a young man's life. Probably our generation was the first kind of wave of generation of males that, again, didn't have that they were raised primarily by females, by women. And so as I think about it, I just wonder if this is what we're seeing in terms of men acting out, males. I'm not even going to say men, males acting out in very dangerous and violent ways in our culture and our society, largely towards culture, towards society at large, and just randomly, not even necessarily like a personal, I have something, this is something that is between us, a personal feud or some kind of retaliation or something like that, but literally just out of the blue, just taking something out something that's missing, something that's frustrating. I don't know what's in them. I don't understand the logic, but taking it out on just the world or just the population or somebody that they don't know. I had it was pretty cool. We actually went to go see Hamilton in the theater last week, the play Hamilton, but they had it in the theater, in the movie theater. And, it showed up twice in that play, that the whole idea of a duel, right? And it was, I have a problem with you. We're going to settle this, with the duel, right? And if you've seen the play, there's a whole couple storylines, and obviously it's history with, Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr and all this other stuff. But in those cases, it is something personal between me and said other person, and this is how we're going to handle it. But what we're seeing in our culture is not that. What we're seeing in our culture is almost like an acting out of or a manifestation of I hate the world. And I hate, I just want to go after the world, and I want to lash out at the world, and somebody that I don't know, I'm going to inflict violence upon them just because they represent something. I don't know what it is, but like I said, I wonder if this is the first wave of, and maybe it's a new reality. I don't know, but either way, if it's the first wave of what we're seeing, where there are not men in young men's lives.
I think that actually you hit the nail on the head there, and it's something we probably should unpack as we get deeper into this episode, because since, we've talked about nice guy syndrome and men leaving the homes, back before the Industrial Revolution, all homes were agrarian homes. So you grew up on the farm with dad, you grew up right next to dad, and then dad started going to the factories, he started going to the office, he started leaving the homes. And then as we've had the feminist movement, and then the, taking over the feminist movement by big business and these other industries, now we have the feminization of the world and of the West. And, most schools are 95% female. Most men or most young boys have nothing but feminine influence. And so there's also the war against healthy masculinity. So the world is against men. The world is against healthy masculinity, is against just natural masculinity. They're demonizing it. And so most young men feel like the world is against them. Most young men feel like being themselves, being masculine, being a man is wrong somehow. And so, of course, they look at the world as the enemy. So they look at society as the enemy because they don't have a healthy representation of masculinity. And then all the representations they do see are, Homer Simpson and the bumbling father, and the women are the strong ones and the men are just idiots. And so they're trained to feel like their natural masculinity is unnatural. They're trained to feel like the world is actually against them and that they don't have a part to play or a place to be in the world. And so, of course, if you don't have an experience of healthy masculinity, you don't have an example of a healthy father in your life, you're going to feel like the world is against you. And so when we get back from this next break, we're really going to dig into why men and young boys feel like nowadays the world's against them. So we're the Mad Men of Masculinity. This is KLDC, and we'll be right back.
Man, I didn't know we got blocked on Facebook.
Well, just on the Mad Men page. So if you're on my page, or if you want to share it, you probably can do it. But
yeah, I'll share it on mine. That's jacked up, man.
Well, anytime you want to talk about something, especially right now, they're going to be all up in you.
Yeah. We got to be willing to talk about stuff, man. All right, let's roll.
All right.
Set my stopwatch.
All right, sir.
And we're back. We are the Mad Men of Masculinity on KLDC 1220 in the Mile High City, on the interwebs, everywhere, podcast platforms, somewhere on your grandmama's front porch. We everywhere, man. We out there, man. We up in these streets, man. We up in these streets doing this thing. And today we're talking about, we actually, because of the title, unless we decide to change the title got us kind of shadow banned on one social media platform just from having this conversation. But ideally, unpacking men in our culture, men in our society today, at least in this Western culture, at least in America anyway, the whole notion of violence and men, the two kind of going hand in hand. And when we left off, we were talking about men not feeling necessarily safe, or just feeling maybe the world is against us. Or just not covered. I don't even know how you overall word that thing, but either way, most of us by far, overwhelmingly, I mean, you probably have a hard time finding a man who did have a male primary figure in their life growing up these days. I mean, not that all of our fathers were gone per se, but the primary person that raised us, the primary person that, that was the important figure when we sat down at the dinner table, if we sat down at the dinner table, was a female. And so, so the speculation is, could it be that, that there's a disconnect between, or a connection between, men not being raised by men primarily, and what we're seeing now is, whenever you hear about any kind of violence in our society, it's a male, and most of the time it's a lone male, which I'll dig into that a little bit later too. But yeah, it's are we missing, or did we miss something growing up because we didn't have a male? And now, I'm saying we, not that you and I directly. I'm talking we as in our team, our male team, the male species, the Y chromosome crew. Are we acting out because of what we didn't get growing up?
I would say absolutely yes, because I mean, even going back to the point I made before the break, that a lot of our society, a lot of how young men and young boys are growing up now is very feminine focused. And you look at how they've really tried to downplay masculinity, they've tried to squash it. I mean, you can go into food and water and all these other things, but just even in education systems, young boys are not meant to sit for 8 hours in a chair, and they have all this testosterone building in their systems to create, to turn them into men. And that does not make you really capable of sitting still for 8 hours. Little boys need to be out playing, they need to be in the woods, they need to spend most of their time moving, because all that testosterone in their system as they grow makes them energetic. It makes them, and then then the system as it is says, oh well, they're uncontrollable, they label them as ADD or ADHD, then we need to give them amphetamines and try to control them and try to make them focus. Well, you add all these things up where you're not supposed to be masculine, you're supposed to sit still and look pretty just like a girl. Everything that's quote unquote masculine that a boy is seeing is bad. And then they're being medicated and put in these systems that don't allow them to actually express their energy, don't allow them to get out and be at roughhouse and be boys and be physical. And then you have this underlying current of male is bad, men is bad, masculinity is bad. And that will lead to some sort of depression, some sort of mental illness, some sort of things. And then to your point about the lone gunman, 100% of these lone gunmen in schools and in Vegas and stuff like that have been on some sort of antidepressant, on some sort of medication. So obviously the medication is not working. And there's a bigger issue at foot. There's a bigger issue in the world when it comes to masculinity in men that's causing these issues.
You bring up the whole idea of femininity, and the more I think about it, and this just popped into my mind, this might be controversial, I don't care, but men respect violence. I mean, men respect violence so much that we value peace, and we know that violence is, and I'm talking men. We know that violence is not the end all be all answer, because there's a danger. I don't know that the feminine reasoning or logic really respects the idea of violence as much as men do. And so when we act outside of the respect for violence, then maybe we are acting outside of masculinity. Maybe we are acting outside of manhood, where violence is not the answer. we normally don't go picking fights with a whole lot of people, because we know the end result could be very dangerous. And I like I said, I think that whole philosophy is a man thing more than a woman thing, because in the female world, violence or conflict, I'll say, doesn't necessarily mean high danger or high likelihood of this could be all over right now. And so when we act out of that, maybe we are acting out of the feminine as opposed to the masculine, which again kind of goes back to my point of, if we weren't raised by men, then we don't get that passed down to us. We don't get the whole idea of, when you're young, fight it out. Like, I don't, literally, like, having a fight at the flagpole at 3 o'clock. That was a thing back in the day, right? And there was a whole lot less school shootings back then, or school, whatever. I probably just triggered some algorithm right there, but there was a whole lot less violence in schools back then, when it was like, hey, I got a problem with you, we're gonna duke it out. And then most of the time when you duke it out, those two people become best friends or friends afterwards, but it's over, but it's squashed. And so, we want to wrap them in bubble wrap and keep them safe, and tell them not to to take care of things in a relatively safe way, or to be able to handle business. I remember having a conversation with my son that, he was in middle school, and, things changed in middle school, where I think a lot of the kids began to act out the stuff they were hearing at the house, and that showed up at school. And so he had some issues with some kids, and, kids were coming to him with some racist kind of stuff and getting up in his face and all that. And I told him, I was like, man, next time somebody gets in your face, you punch them right there in their nose. And I said, no, don't worry about the consequences. I got that part. But if somebody gets in your face, then then you have every right to defend yourself. Because if you won't defend yourself, you won't defend your country, you won't defend your beliefs. You have every right to defend yourself. And so, so if somebody gets in your face, and definitely if somebody put their hands on you, then you handle business, and you let me worry about the consequences. And I had to go up to the school because he ended up handling some business. And I remember sitting across the desk from, I remember the assistant principal name, and I told him exactly what I told my son. And I was like, hey, if y'all can't provide a safe environment for him, then it's up to him to provide a safe environment for himself. But I want him to handle it, directly, as opposed to going back and stewing on it, and all of a sudden, he come up to school and take it out on everybody. I want him to be able to handle his business one-on-one, as opposed to one on everybody. I don't think that kind of mentality exists these days. And again, I'm not advocating just violence for the sake of violence. I am advocating that, that young men should be guided and taught how to be safe within a violent world, or within an adversarial world, how to operate, and how to handle yourself, how to handle your business.
Yeah, I think it goes back to, because when we raise men with a feminine narrative, and you look at the differences between men and women, women are born with inherent value, and there are no repercussions to their actions, because we as men have been taught that you don't hit women, and you see in marriages and in domestic violence cases, violence from men and women in the home is about 50-50. There is not overwhelmingly men. But men have been taught that you don't hit a woman, and then the women have learned that there's no repercussions. So you have a lot of little boys raised by single mothers who, without meaning to, are training their boys that there's no repercussions for their actions, because that's what they learned as women. And so we as men need to train these boys about repercussions. And you see how different it is from a boy who's had training, who's done martial arts, who's been in sports, who has confidence because he has experience, and he has confidence because he's actually experienced failing forward and trials and tribulations, versus being coddled and bubble wrapped. And then he goes out in the world and he has all this social media and video games all up in his head and all this stuff where it's just a reset. You respawn in Call of Duty. Once you get shot, you get respawned. So there's no real repercussions. So a lot of young boys don't see any real repercussions, and they're moms doing the best they can don't train them in the way that boys need to be trained to realize how you fail forward, how you deal with repercussions, how you deal with violence. Because for most men, and I mean, until we elevate as a species, this is the way it is. For most men, there's a line you don't cross. You cross that line, there's going to be violence. But we as men instinctually know that, because that's part of our role in the hunter-gatherer family dynamic. We're there to be the protector. We're the provider, the protector, and we're supposed to lead the family. And by leading the family means we need to be there to protect our wife and child and be the one that does the violence, be the one that protects from the violence, be the one that is watching out for all the bad things that can happen. But when we don't have that education and we don't feel like there's any repercussions to our actions, and you see so many of these young men nowadays, especially, I mean, all of us as men, we were dirtbags from 12 to question mark. I mean, teenage boys are dirtbags. That's kind of how we learn how to become men, because we're just out there in the streets doing dumb stuff. And then hopefully it's not fatal. But all of us have had those moments where we're like, man, I almost died. And then we learn from that and go, okay, maybe I shouldn't do that. And then we cross the wrong guy and he punches us in the face like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that. These are how the ways and the things that most young men need to experience to understand what it means to be a man, to understand that line. And when we don't have that education, we don't have that experience, when we don't see that, and then we have the coddling and the bubble wrapping from moms and school systems, and we have this whole feminist narrative of, oh, masculinity is violent and it's wrong. No, unhealthy masculinity is violent and wrong. Toxic masculinity doesn't even exist. It's a toxic person who didn't have the education to be a healthy man that causes all these issues. And you look, 90%, 95% of school shooters and homeless men and guys going to prison come from single mother households. That means they didn't have a man or a father in the home to teach them the repercussions of their actions. And that's what masculinity is for, especially when it comes to raising children. We allow them to experience the world and prepare them for the world. We allow them to fall on their face. We allow them to scrape up their knee. We allow them to stick the fork in the light socket, because they won't do it again. Once you get shocked, once you bump your head, once you do whatever, you learn from that. And that's what we're not seeing. And that's the biggest dilemma we have with young men in the world today, is that single mothers don't have the tools, and then demonize the fathers because of their emotional upbringing or the emotional outlet, that, oh, the father's bad and the father's the problem. So these young men don't get the education from their father that they need to be a man in the world today.
Yeah. And speaking of education, we're going to educate ourselves in this break. We'll be right back. Hey. Mad Men and Masculinity on KLDC. Well, see, man, my big old stopwatch pays off.
See, it works. Yeah, I was a little late. So I had a minute on my timer. Oops.
A big old watch.
Yeah, well, you need to put that thing in your carry-on. Apparently, you can get unless you like getting searched at the airport. You get that pat down. Man. You like that pat down?
They just be hating on me. That's all. They just be hating. Although I did get some love. Talking about my watch. All right, here we go.
Here we go.
We're back. Yes, Mad Men of Masculinity, KLDC 1220. Talking about, man, we're talking about a whole lot of stuff, but all of it around men and men maybe having a tendency to have some excessive public outlashing violence these days. And, off of that last segment, I can almost hear the hypersensitive woman, female out there that hears, I don't know about you, but hears me or hears us blaming women. I ain't blaming women for the violence. I'm crediting men that when men are present, when men are there, a lot of things happen that we don't necessarily pick up on. A lot of things are in the recipe that without those things, we're all at danger. We're all we're all targets when men are not present, especially in young men's lives. And when men are present in young men's lives, we help them establish certain boundaries. We help them establish certain concepts, certain philosophies, all these other kind of things that preclude them from going out and doing a lot of things that we see males doing these days. And again, I mean, it's, you can almost script it. As soon as you hear the news flash, you already know what the description of the suspect, is going to be. And almost exclusively, It's a lone male, which even brings me to the point of the fact that it's not even just a male, but it's a lone male, which, I think in itself also says that, man, there's something about not only men being in younger men's lives, but men being in older men's lives. But they kind of go hand in hand, because if you didn't grow up with a man or with males in your life, in your sphere and circle, then when you get older, it's just not something that is normal. It's not something that you incorporate into your life anyway. So of course, you're not going to live your life with other men in your circle. And so yeah, my idea is crediting men being in other men's lives, younger and as we get older, because without it, man, we men left to our own, vices, that's when you're dangerous. You can be violent without being dangerous. I don't think, again, that's to me, that's a huge difference, man. And like you said, I mean, somebody can be a 9th degree black belt and be the least dangerous person in the room. A Navy SEAL could be the least dangerous person in any crowded room of men, even though he's literally trained to be violent. And so when we have other men, and Navy SEALs don't live life alone, and quite the opposite. I mean, they just don't. Lone Ranger had Tonto. I mean, you can go on and on and on. There's no such thing as a lone wolf, literally, in nature. Wolves don't live alone, or if they do, there's something wrong. They live in a pack. And so when we live as men, especially in our Western culture, if you're not living with other men in your life, if you're not being raised with a man in your life, then you're not set up for success. And ladies, if you have a son and for whatever reason, first of all, you ought not do anything to remove your son's father from his life. I don't care how much you hate him. I don't care how much he hurt you, what he did to you, cheated on you, I don't know, whatever. I don't care how much, there's a broken down relationship between the two of you. If you decide to take any active part in removing or making sure that your son or daughter, but in this case, we're talking about son, to make sure that they don't have a relationship with their father, then there's a special place for you, because you do make the world dangerous if that's the type of woman that you are. And so and then on the opposite spectrum, I would highly encourage you, said lady, to find a circle that your son can be in, whether it's a sports team, some kind of group somewhere. We've talked about this before, but make sure your son is raised with men in his life.
Yeah, and it's not blame. I'm not blaming single mothers. I know you're doing the best you can, but you don't have the tools. You're not a man. And to Kirk's point, a lot of you, because you're run by emotions and you don't like your ex-husband and you're mad at the world because you got divorced, you may tend to swing towards trying to isolate or trying to demonize your ex and keep your son away, and thinking that if your son goes to spend time with your ex, that he's going to be like your ex. No, we as men tend to learn just as much from our fathers about what not to do as what to do. And so it's, even if he's not the ideal candidate as a father, you may think, he still has an impact and will still teach your son a lot of good things, but he needs to be in his life so your son can actually have the opportunity to learn. And to Kirk's point, like, we need to be more around men, especially young boys need to be around men. And if the father's not there, if he's passed away, if he's not in the picture, if he's inaccessible, there are groups, there's sports teams, there's martial arts, there's so many groups of men, there's big brothers, there's so many men out there who want to have an impact on the generation to follow, because they didn't get that impact in their lives. A lot of us had fathers in the homes. Maybe they were emotionally absent. Maybe they were mentally absent. Maybe they were abusive, or maybe they were such a high achiever that there was no way we could achieve what they did. And so there's only maybe 5 to 10% of men out there that had the quote unquote perfect dad and one that they can emulate and be just like. Most of them had, either he wasn't there, he was emotionally not there, or he's such a high achiever that they just feel like they couldn't live up to that. So most men have one of those examples, but they did have the example. And that's the biggest thing, is that men need to learn from men. And women, as much as you try, as much as you want to be the alpha boss babe, as much as you try to stand in your masculinity, that's not your natural nature. You have a role to play as the nurturer, as a caretaker, as the mother. He has a job as a father and the protector and the provider. If you try to do both things, you're missing out. And then the only one that suffers is the child. And then when that child becomes adult, then it's society, because all of society is just young children out in the world in adult bodies pretending they know what's going on. So all we're saying is it's not your fault, but know the rules, know the recipe, and know that your son needs men in his life.
Yeah, I mean, moms, single moms, whatever, are not the problem, but you are part of the solution. And part of that solution is, how do I get my son around healthy groups of men? And there, man, you don't have to really search too hard to find them. Again, I mean, I'm talking sports teams, anything. I mean, ask around, look up. I mean, ask around in the community. I mean, call a church. I don't know. Call your city council town. Look up. I mean, you got Google, man. I mean, our grandparents didn't have Google. You got Google. Google. Look up. Some kind of group or some kind of something circle that your young male can be a part of. And that is, that's your contribution. And then us as men that are out here, we need to be open to, how can I impact at least one or two or a few young men's lives? And what could I do? And sometimes the best thing we can do as men is just be there, just show up, just be present. But there are organizations out there that just do mentoring for specifically for young males. And so, I mean, on one hand, us as men, it's incumbent upon us to get out there and be part of those circles, which then also helps us be part of circles of males. But then also, if you're in a scenario where you're a single parent, particularly a single mom, you need to make sure that you have something in your son's life that involves circles of men, so that he doesn't grow up hating everyone and taking it out on everyone.
And it's such a great point, because one of the things that I know most of these men, these low men, are missing is purpose and something greater than themselves. And if a man's out there in the world and he's just struggling, he doesn't have a woman, he doesn't have a wife and a family, and he's on antidepressants and he's going to therapy, and he just doesn't see anything larger than himself to live for, being a mentor, being a big brother, just showing up. And we talked to so many guys about just showing up. You don't have to, be the best. You don't got to be the star athlete. You don't got to be all these things. You don't got to be no Navy SEAL to come and mentor young boys. You just got to show up. And by showing up, you will gain as much from that mentoring, that mentorship to that little boy or to that young man than he will get, because it gives you purpose. It shows you that you make an impact in the world. It shows you that your life has meaning. And all of these young lone males that are on the antidepressants and out there, they end up being the lone shooters and gunmen. They don't feel like they have a purpose. They don't feel like they have any impact in the world. They feel worthless and unseen and useless. They feel like there's no point for them to be there. And that's why they react the way they do. That's why they act out the way they do. And so there's just, as much as it is upon fathers to stay in their sons and daughters' lives, ladies, you have a part to play too, by allowing that, or by being part of the solution, by having that young man have a mentor or be a part of martial arts or sports or any sort of organization, Boy Scouts, whatever. There's so many good men out there that just want to feel like they belong, feel like they have a purpose. And if that purpose is by being there so that your young son can see what a healthy man is and what masculine is, and to find out that line you don't cross, find out what the repercussions of their actions could be, then you need a man there for them. But there's such a lack of healthy masculine and influence nowadays, and we're seeing the repercussions of that. We're seeing the results of that, and we're not blaming anybody. We as human beings will go, we try things out. A lot of times we go too far, and then we have to come back and readjust. And now we're in this readjust period where we're realizing that there's nothing wrong with the roles that we have been given by God. There's nothing wrong with the roles of masculine and feminine polarity. These are how things are set up. And our biggest issue now is the fact that we're fighting against that.
I wonder if Hey, I wonder if this is like when a tsunami hits,
Mhm.
the first thing that happens is the waters recede. Like the
Yes.
waters, they pull back out into the ocean, and it actually ends up being dry, and then you have the big flood coming in. So I almost wonder if if this is what we're seeing is the wave receding back out into the ocean before we get a sense of some positivity or some positive direction for just males in general. Again, I don't necessarily think we're screwed as men as far as we're all terrible, we're all in trouble. Just the opposite. Matter of fact, I think there's way more good men than not good men. Way more, like by far. Unfortunately, it's the ones that make the news that creates the narrative. Unfortunately, and so just like in not to go off rails, but just like in the dating world, people come up with a narrative about the dating scene when really it's a couple of outliers that really make the picture bad. And so I wonder if this is kind of this may be the first wave of males that didn't grow up with a male as a primary figure in their life, but at the same time, this kind of recession makes room for advancement going on in the future.
Yeah, I think you probably have a point there. And speaking of recession, it's probably time for
Yeah.
us to recess ourselves a break. So we're
Boom.
the
Last
Madmen
one.
of Masculinity. This is KLDC, and we'll be right back.
I took forever asking that or making that point, but like I said, I just wonder, man, because I'm like, man, I mean,
Well, you
sometimes it's got to get
figure,
bad before it gets better.
yeah. Well, you figure everything's about balance, and everything. A lot of times when you go off balance, you rock it back and forth on that seesaw to find your balance. It's got to calm back down. So yeah, I think
It's like
we're
the
in
pendulum,
yeah.
it swings one way, and then it ultimately inevitably comes back and swings back the other way. Huh.
Everything goes in cycles too. So I mean, yeah, I think
Yeah.
if it's been this bad this long, then there's got to be some good over the horizon coming our way.
Yeah. All right.
Let's do it.
Let's see. Yeah. Yo, 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 we're back. Madmen
Yes,
of
sir.
Masculinity. KLDC is where you can find it over the airwaves here in the Mile High City, 1220 AM. All you gotta do is turn your radio on, because I know everybody rides around in their car with their radio on, listening to AM radio. But of
Mhm.
course, besides that, you can holler at us on YouTube, on Facebook. Shoot, I even see some pop-ups on TikTok every now and then. This weird. I'll be scrolling my timeline and I'm like, hey, wait a minute, and all
That
of a
looks like
sudden
me.
yours or my face will pop up on there. But we ain't hard to find. And of course, podcast platforms love hearing from guys. When we had the summit a few weeks ago, we had some guys there that just heard about the summit uh because of the podcast and all that kind of stuff. That was pretty cool of them to show up. But yeah, I mean, we were talking about just, the pendulum, things can get
Mhm.
bad, but hopefully, at some point, it can get better. And I think men are the solution. I honestly do. I think men are the solution to most problems in our culture these days. Because when men decide to do something, we find a way to get it done. When we decide to put a man on the moon, a man walks on the moon. When we decide to when we decide to invent something, that there's a need for something, it happens. And so I think men are the solution to most, if not pretty much every problem we have in our culture, in our society, whether it be relational, financial, I mean, whatever needs to be done. And so hopefully, us as men can be the solution to this problem, to unhealthy dangerous violence. I'll say danger in our culture, because again, the more I talk about it here, the more I think there's a difference between violence and danger. And though I don't think violence is a bad thing, because again, we monetize it and we do it for fun in sports. I don't think violence is necessarily a bad thing in the right context, but in all of those sports, there's boundaries, there's rules, there's certain parameters and all those kinds of things. And so, but then there's danger in our culture. And I think the danger in our culture is where men can come in and say, okay, we need to chill on this stuff. Even like some of the, political banter and all that kind of stuff and back and forth and hating this side, hating that side. And, when good men kind of begin to step in and say, all right, people, come on, man, let's chill. Let's come together and make some things happen. And that's when good things happen.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. And men are the solution. I think the whole war on masculinity proves that those that are, the powers that be, whatever you want to call it, know that men are the solution. And that's why they've been demonizing masculinity and making men the enemy and trying to make men as feminine as possible, because when men are not in their masculine nature and they don't have that masculine foundation, then they don't stand up for anything. They're not the backbone of society. They're not the backbone of the family. They're not the one to get violent when violence is needed. They're not the one to protect their families. They just are wishy-washy and fall over at whatever breeze and are very emotional, and they become basically ladies. And that's why women nowadays can't find good men. That's why a lot of young boys can't find mentors, and the fathers aren't in the home because of the monetization of divorce and everything else. There's so many reasons, but I think of, as like you said, when the pendulum swings back, everybody's starting to figure it out now. Like the water's pulling back and showing what's underneath the waves and showing the foundation of what's going on. And even there's a lot of ladies now who have went the feminist route are starting to say, oh, men are not the problem and I'm not the problem, but there is a problem and we need to come together to fix it. And that means acknowledging healthy masculinity, acknowledging healthy femininity, acknowledging our strengths and weaknesses, and acknowledging that they're not bad things. Men have a purpose, women have a purpose. We need each other. And more than anything, we don't just need each other, we need to have a village. This whole one parent trying to raise a child is insanity. It's hard enough for two parents, which it never should have been two parents, because that is stressful and causes issues within raising the children and families. You need a whole village. And I think we're all starting to see this isolation, this separatist agenda of we got to separate men from women. We got to separate the right from the left. We got to separate people from other people. We got to separate everybody so that we're easier to control and manipulate. But most of us are starting to see, the forest through the trees and starting to see what's going on and starting to realize that as this water pulls back and we start to see what's underneath the waves, we start to see what's underneath the water. We're starting to realize that we need each other, and not only each other as men and women, but we need each other as a community, as a country, as a world. And we need to stop allowing this manipulation to happen that's causing all these issues, that's causing things like we see in school shootings and people getting assassinated and whatnot. All this stuff is coming from this manipulation and the separatist agenda. We know we need each other, and it's time for us to just accept the fact that we need to have men in our world, healthy, masculine, strong men. We need to have healthy, feminine, strong women. And we need to come together to build a better world.
You can monetize division. It's really hard, or I'll say it's harder to monetize unity, right? And so, if powers that be can have us choose which side of a line we're going to be on, then they can begin to pander to one side of that line over the other and make us more divided and make us see the other as an enemy that didn't exist before there was a line that we had to somehow, for some reason, put ourselves on one side or the other. And unfortunately, us being on one side of that line or the other has been part of the way that we can be divided, part of the way that we can be separated, part of the way that we can be, we can be monetized. And so when we as men come together, again, I mean, and not be dangerous, come together to lift up and not put down, come together to mentor, and not to, not to abandon, then, man, then we're all going to be a better place. We're all going to be in a better place. Then we can really accomplish some stuff that's going to be good for our grandkids and our great grandkids. But unfortunately, where we are right now is, the examples that we have of mass casualties, or just the news stories that happen involving, high visibility violence. It's all males. It's all lone males. And so, we need to begin to pour into to men, each other, the current generation and the next generation. And B, we need to start living among circles of men so that we don't become that lone whatever that went out and did something crazy and made society a more dangerous place. Um, and like I said, I really do think that men is the solution.
Yeah, I'm complete agreement, and I think nowadays one of the things that has come around that is really good is that more men are open to internal work, more men are open to therapy, more men are open to inner child work. Right over my shoulder, my new book, Facing the Devil in You, available on Amazon. Go get your copy. It's all about shadow work and inner child work. And especially when you have a group of men around you doing the same work, and you realize that most of us, especially these isolated men that are lashing out against the world, they have a traumatized inner child. They have a traumatized little boy inside them that they need to re-raise, they need to heal. And this work needs to happen for everybody, not just men, but for women as well. But when men come together to do this kind of work and they show vulnerability and they show the strength in that vulnerability, empowering other men to look within themselves, to find that traumatized little boy. Mama said something, daddy said something when you're 2, 3, 4 years old. You took that on as truth. And then that has run your life. That has become the recipe of your creation, of your story. And that is what is causing your issues. When you go within, accept your shadow side. Most men nowadays have not accepted their shadow. They have been raised by a well-meaning single mother and a feminist narrative that says, oh, be a good little boy and don't be violent, don't roughhouse, don't be strong, don't be masculine. When they accept that fact that every man that I know, every man that Kirk knows, every man we run into has the capacity for violence, has the capacity to take another person out. And when they accept that capacity, it empowers them. It's when you deny those capacities, when you deny the shadow side, when you deny that inner child within you that needs your love, that's when the issues start. You need to be a holistic man. You need to be a holistic human being. And that starts with accepting all sides of yourself. When you accept both sides, then you become empowered because you know you're capable. It's much easier to deal with somebody in your face who's trying to hurt you or steal from you or whatnot when you know you can handle that. When you know you have the experience, you know that you have the capacity. Most young men nowadays don't believe or know that they have the capacity for violence. So they think they're weak. And that feeling of weakness causes all the issues. That feeling of weakness as a man causes self-disrespect, causes self-loathing, and then it leads them to becoming this person who blows up and lashes out. So I'm here to help you. Kirk's here to help you. We're all here to help you become the best version of yourself you can be. But it's a matter of being willing to do the work and look deep within and accept that shadow side.
When you know that you're empowered, and when you know that you're empowered even in your ability to be violent, then your presence alone represents safety for other people. um you know we live in a nuclear world, right? And with you can split an atom and destroy a city, or you can split an atom and power a city. So it's not the splitting of the atom that's neither good nor bad. It's how you attribute that power that comes from that. And so us as men, as we show up and as we are present in our society, we walk around like a split atom. And it's like, what am I going to do with that? A sword is a weapon and it's a tool. Do you choose to use it for harm, or do you choose to use it for good? And so us as men, as we move and live, and we act out our masculinity in all the best ways that we can, then again we have the ability to power a city, and we also have the ability to destroy one. So it's up to us to choose on a daily basis which one we're going to do. Most men by far, again, overwhelmingly, most men by far are city powerers and not city destroyers. Um, unfortunately, the city destroyers. I mean, there's a whole lot of bombs that have been made over the course of history. There were two of them that literally leveled cities, right? And so we measure things. We measure the power of those devices based on those two bombs. And so, and so what I'm getting at is, yeah, the negative can absolutely create the narrative for the against the positive, but if you look globally, there's a lot more good being done by that same technology. And so us as men and our healthy masculinity, we're a technology that can be used for good. And as soon as we see ourselves in that light and realize what good we can do, then we can begin to power a city, power a home, power a family, power a community. We can begin to empower other people, because when we are strong, when we are healthy, everybody else around us is better as well. And so us as men ought not fear our ability to be violent. We ought to respect that, and we ought to see that as an empowerment to do something good, as an opportunity to do something good, as opposed to an opportunity to do something bad. And so I think this conversation was good, and I appreciate it. For sure. And so with that, we are a little bit over time. We're going to leave you guys with just our love, our support. It's a tough time in our country, tough time in a lot of people's lives. A lot of people are going through things. We need to talk about difficult topics. Unfortunately, social media has even capped some of this discussion being made, but we need to be able to talk about this stuff, and we need to be able to come together as men, for men, and through men and by men. So we are the Mad Men of Masculinity. And until next time, we will talk to y'all later. We are out.